Good morning. I have Harper. She's on her back and she is not loving it, but she is being pretty good. So happy Monday to you. Hope your day is going well so far. Hope you had a good weekend. I hope that you were able to get out and get some of that sunshine and beautiful weather while still, of course, maintaining your social distance from people to whom you should not be intermingling with this COVID-19 monstrosity out there. So we were able to go kayaking, which seemed like a good way to do some social distancing. So I took the kayaks out on the lake, and it was quite lovely. Beautiful weather, beautiful weekend. I hope yours was good too. Okay. Today, we are going to be finishing, maybe, I think we'll be able to get through it, Act 5, Scene 3, the final scene in Act 5. Okay. We start out at a churchyard outside the tomb of the Capulets. Now, if you were the director, how you would perhaps stage that is up to you with, probably use some lighting, some darker lighting, some sound effects to make it sound like night. Shakespeare didn't have any of that. So what he does, he has his actors basically paint the scene for you. So Paris in the beginning is going to mention several things that he's seeing that are not actually on stage, obviously, because this is a little suspension of disbelief in theater. But so he talks about the yew trees, about the freshly turned graves, about all this imagery, about what the tomb, what the graveyard is going to look like, where the tomb of the Capulets is. So we have that. Pay attention to that. If you were actually directing it for a modern theatrical audience, again, you'd use lighting and probably set pieces and sound effects and all that. Shakespeare didn't have that, so he had Paris describe the scene for us. So that's how we're going to start out. All right. Enter Paris and his page with flowers and sweet water and a torch. All right, here we are. So Paris says, "Give me thy torch, boy, hence, and stand aloof. Yet put it out, for I would not be seen." It being the torch. "Under yon yew trees lay thee all along, holding thine ear close to the hollow ground. So shall no foot upon the churchyard tread, being loose, unfirm, with digging up of graves, but thou shalt hear it. Whistle then to me, as signal that thou hearest something approach." Okay? So he's giving the boy instructions to stand aloof, to stand apart from him, to give him leave while he is going to pay his respects to Juliet. They're at the tomb of the Capulets. Okay, so he talks about the yon yew trees. Yon is short for yonder. So those yew trees over there, yew trees in Shakespeare's time were often associated with death and mourning. So that's why he chose that. Talks about the churchyard, the dirt being loose and unfirm, but he wants the boy to keep a watch out. Basically, keep his ear close to the ground. Perhaps he means literally, perhaps not. But to watch for anyone coming, and if anyone comes, whistle then to me, he says, as a signal that someone is approaching. Okay? He asks for the flowers. He says, "Give me those flowers. Do as I bid thee. Go." So then Paris extinguishes his torch. Page extinguishes the torch, gives Paris the flowers. The page says in an aside, "I am almost afraid to stand alone here in the churchyard, yet I will adventure." So Page shows a little bit of courage here. He moves aside, off stage, no doubt, but not too far off. Paris begins to scatter the flowers at Juliet's closed tomb. So he's dropping the flowers out. He says, "Sweet flower, with flowers thy bridal bed I strew." Okay. So it should have been her bridal bed that he put flowers on, rose petals or what have you. But instead, this is the bridal bed that he is strewing, casting the flowers out. It says, "Oh, woe, thy canopy is dust and stones." So instead of the canopy of the bed, he's talking about the canopy for her is dust and stones now. It says, "Which with sweet water nightly I will do, or wanting that, with tears distilled by moans, the obsequies that I for thee will keep, nightly shall be to strew thy grave and weep." Okay. So lots of iambic pentameter all throughout this scene. Actually, Paris is showing his bona fides as a member of the upper class by speaking in rhyming iambic pentameter. Do you think this makes him seem more sincere or less sincere? Question for another time, perhaps. Suddenly we hear from off stage some kind of whistle. The page says, "The boy gives warning, something doth approach. What cursed foot wanders this way tonight to cross my obsequies and true love's right? What with the torch? Muffle me, knight, a while." So he wants the knight to muffle him, to hide him. Someone is approaching. The cursed foot is approaching. And he uses this word obsequies a couple times. We've seen this before in the play. Obsequies are prayers. So his prayers, his acts of devotion are these obsequies that have been interrupted by someone here. And the page has whistled to him to let him know someone is on the way. So now Paris moves away from the tomb. He's probably not going to be entirely off stage, probably hiding behind something on stage so that Romeo and Balthazar do not see him when they approach the Capulet monument. Romeo says, "Give me that mattock and the wrenching iron." Takes them from Balthazar. So a mattock is a kind of pickaxe, and then the wrenching iron is the crowbar. So he has a pickaxe and a crowbar. Remember, at this time, this is a big stone structure with some kind of a stone door covering it. So he has to use a pickaxe and the crowbar to open the big stone blocking door. I want to say like a big boulder, but that's not exactly what it would be. It would be more like a stone door. It says, "Hold, take this letter. Early in the morning, see thou deliver it to my lord and father." He gives the letter to Balthazar. "Give me the lights." Takes from him the torch. "'S upon thy life, I charge thee, whate'er thou hearest or seest, stand all aloof, and do not interrupt me in my course. Why I descend into this bed of death is partly to behold my lady's face, but chiefly to take thence from her dead finger a precious ring, a ring that I must use in dear employment. Therefore hence, be gone. But if thou, jealous, dost return to pry in what I farther shall intend to do, by heaven I will tear thee joint by joint, and strew this hungry churchyard with thy limbs. The time and my intents are savage, wild, more fierce, and more inexorable far than empty tigers or the roaring sea." Romeo, very intense right off the bat here. He takes what he needs from Balthazar and sends him away, and he warns him, "Do not interrupt me in my course." He gives him a story that he's there to get a ring from Juliet's finger, from Juliet's dead finger that he was using dear employment. Dear employment, my footnote for that says precious business. And so he says, if you leave, he says, so leave. But if you do think that you're going to come back and pry, if you're jealous, which in this context means suspicious, if you're suspicious of what I further intend to do, he says, if you come back, I will tear you limb from limb and strew the churchyard with your limbs. All right, a little intense, Romeo. You don't need to tear your servant apart. But this shows his state of mind, right? And he even states it. The time and my intents are savage, wild, more fierce, more inexorable. Inexorable means pitiless, like unstoppable. More inexorable far than empty tigers or the roaring sea. By empty tigers, we mean like hungry tigers, right? You can't stop a hungry tiger, and you can't stop the roaring sea. Balthazar says, I will be gone, sir, and not trouble you. Romeo, so shalt thou show me friendship. Take thou that, and he gives Balthazar some money. Live and be prosperous, and farewell, good fellow. Okay. If Balthazar has any sense about him, he can see that Romeo doesn't plan on seeing Balthazar again. And maybe Balthazar can put two and two together and think, hey, maybe Romeo doesn't plan on seeing anybody again. All right. So the scene continues. And so undoubtedly, because of what Romeo just said to him, Balthazar says in an aside, for all the same, I'll hide me hereabout. His looks I fear, and his intents I doubt. So then Balthazar moves aside, finds a hiding place, and falls asleep. Romeo says in a soliloquy, but he's speaking to the personified tomb. He says, thou detestable maw, thou womb of death, gorged with the dearest morsel of the earth, thus I enforce thy rotten jaws to open, and in despite I'll cram thee with more food. He begins to open the tomb with his tools. All right? So he's personified that the tomb is a living thing that's hungry, as a detestable maw, a mouth. A maw is an open mouth. So he says, you detestable maw, you womb of death. Awesome language here. He says, gorged with the dearest morsel of the earth. Gorged. If you gorge, you just eat until you can't hold anymore. And he says that Juliet was the dearest morsel of the earth, that this tomb has gorged her body. And so he says, I enforce your rotten jaws to open. Great imagery here. And he says, and in despite, I'll cram thee with more food. So he says, no matter how full you are, I'm going to give you more food. And obviously, speaking about himself. He has to open the tomb with his tools. Paris, in an aside, notices Romeo and says to our audience, this is that banished, haughty Montague that murdered my love's cousin, with which grief it is supposed the fair creature died. And here is come to do some villainous shame to the dead bodies. I will apprehend him. All right. So he thinks that Romeo is doing what Montagues do and despoiling a Capulet tomb. He blames Romeo for Juliet's death because it was her grief for the cousin that he thinks she died of. And he thinks that Romeo is here to do some villainous shame to the dead bodies. Doesn't exactly describe what the villainous shame might be, but any number of things our imagination could go to what he could possibly be doing to the dead bodies. Okay? He says, I will apprehend him. He says to Romeo, stop thy unhallowed toil, vile Montague. Can vengeance be pursued further than death? Condemned villain, I do apprehend thee. Obey and go with me, for thou must die. I always take Paris as being a little bit smug. That's why I read him as such. Okay, so thy unhallowed toil, that means unholy work. The toil is work. So this evil work that you're doing, you vile Montague. And he's like, why are you trying to take your vengeance further than death? What else are you trying to do to the Capulets? And he calls him a condemned villain. And he says, I'll apprehend thee. You have to obey and go with me, or you will die, Paris tells him. Romeo says, I must indeed, and therefore came I hither. He says, yes, I do need to die. That's why I came here. Good gentle youth, tempt not a desperate man. Fly hence and leave me. Think upon these gone. Let them affright thee. I beseech thee, youth. Put not another sin upon my head by urging me to fury. Oh, be gone. Okay? So that language, tempt not a desperate man. It's a great line. And so he doesn't want another sin on his head. If Paris urges him to fury and he has to fight and perhaps kill him, he does not want another sin upon his head as he is about to go to his eternal reckoning. So he begs him to be gone. He says, by heaven, I love thee better than myself, for I come hither armed against myself. Stay not, be gone. Live, and hereafter say a madman's mercy bid thee run away. So when Romeo says, I love thee better than myself, I love you better than I love me, he says it's because I come here armed against myself. I have weapons against myself, and I have no reason to kill you. I have no reason to fight you. He says, stay not, be gone. He tells him to live and talk about how a madman's mercy allowed you to run away. Paris says, I do defy thy commination and apprehend thee for a felon here. So he says, I refuse your request to leave, and I am going to make a citizen's arrest, you felon. Romeo says, wilt thou provoke me? Then have at thee, boy. And Romeo and Paris fight. Chink, 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 swords. It'll be a great choreographed sword fight scene. So in the movie, perhaps you can see that. Some of the movies don't include this, by the way. Some of the movies versions don't include Paris at the tomb at all. The Leonardo DiCaprio version doesn't have Paris at the tomb at all. So, something to think about. So Romeo and Paris fight. Paris's page says, oh Lord, they fight. I will go call the watch. The watch is a citizen's watch, by the way. It's not quite a police force. They didn't have a police force in Shakespeare's day. It was more of like a citizen's patrol, this watch. So he says, go call. And the page exits. Paris gets stabbed at this point and falls and says, "Oh, I am slain. If thou be merciful, open the tomb. Lay me with Juliet." He requests as he dies. So a dying man's request, as Romeo has killed him, he asks to be lain alongside Juliet. Romeo says, "In faith I will." And he does. He says, "Let me peruse this face. Mercutio's kinsman, noble County Paris." Okay, so he didn't recognize him at first, we see. He was just like, "Get out of my way, tipping on a desperate man." And he didn't recognize who it was. He's like, "Oh, this is Paris. This is Mercutio's relative, maybe a cousin." He says, "A kinsman." He says, "What said my man when my betossed soul did not attend him as we rode? I think he told me Paris should have married Juliet. Said he not so? Or did I dream it so?" Remember, his man did tell him that. But anyway. No, it wasn't his man. It was the nurse. The nurse told him. He says, "Or did I dream it so? Or am I mad, hearing him talk of Juliet, to think it was so? Oh, give me thy hand, one writ with me in sour misfortune's book. I'll bury thee in a triumphant grave." Okay, so again, this image of the book into which our fortunes are written. Paris's fortune was in a book of sour misfortune, unfortunately. And he says, "I will bury thee in a triumphant grave. Bury you alongside Juliet." So Romeo opens the tomb to reveal Juliet inside. Juliet laying on a funeral bier inside the sepulchre. He says, "A grave? Oh no, a lantern, slaughtered youth. For here lies Juliet, and her beauty makes this vault a feasting presence full of light. Death, lie thou there, by a dead man interred." And he lays Paris in the tomb. So yet again, Shakespeare returns to this light imagery. Romeo says, "I don't even need a lantern in here, because there lies Juliet, and her beauty is so full of light that I don't even need light. I don't even need a torch to see." And he does Paris's dying wish. He honors the wish of a dying man, and he lays Paris in the tomb of the Capulets. Very honorable. All right, so now we're in a very intimate scene with Romeo at Juliet's deathbed. And so, very intimate, just the two of them. He is speaking this beautiful soliloquy to her before he drinks the poison. So I'm going to read it all the way through, and then we'll go back through and analyze it, because there's three main sections of it that I want to get to, but I'm going to read it all the way through first, and we'll come back. He says, "How oft when men are at the point of death have they been merry, which their keepers call a lightning before death? Oh, how may I call this a lightning? Oh, my love, my wife, death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath hath had no power yet upon thy beauty. Thou art not yet conquered. Beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, and death's pale flag is not advanced there. Tybalt, liest thou there in thy bloody sheet? Oh, what more favour can I do to thee, than with that hand that cut thy youth in twain to sunder his that was thine enemy? Forgive me, cousin. Ah, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean, abhorred monster keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour? For fear of that, I still will stay with thee, and never from this palace of dim night depart again. Here will I remain with worms that are thy chambermaids. Here will I set up my everlasting rest, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh. Eyes, look your last. Arms, take your last embrace, and lips, O you, the doors of breath, seal with the righteous kiss a dateless bargain to engrossing death. Kisses Juliet, and then takes out the poison. Come, bitter conduct. Come, unsavory guide. Thou desperate pilot, now at once run on the dashing rocks thy seasick weary bark. Here's to my love. Drinks the poison. O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick. Thus with a kiss I die. And he collapses on Juliet. So imagine the tableau here as he dies on Juliet's deathbed. He dies in a final embrace, a final kiss, very romantic, in a dark, suicidal, sadistic. Okay, let's go back and examine or analyze his soliloquy here. So the beginning part is kind of a weird thing. This term lightning is where some people, you might be confused. He's not talking about electricity in the sky lightning. He's talking about a lightening, a lightness. People become light. He says when men are at the point of death, they become merry, they become happy. Their keepers, talking about their jailers, call this a lightning before death. There's this relief knowing that they're going to the gallows, to their death penalty, that they have a lightning. And so he says, but how can I call this a lightning? Looking at my beautiful Juliet, my beautiful love, my wife. And so he looks down at Juliet and says, my love, my wife, death has sucked the honey of thy breath, but it's had no power over your beauty. Ugh, such irony here, such obviously dramatic irony. We know what's really going on. But think about the fact that death has had no power upon thy beauty. It has not, she's been dead for a couple days. You'd think that she'd be pale. You'd think that she'd be conquered, as he put it, that death would have conquered her. He says, thou art not conquered. It's too bad he didn't investigate a little further or wait a little bit, but he's very impetuous. He says, beauty's ensign or beauty's sign, beauty's flag is yet crimson in your lips, your cheeks. You haven't gone pale like a dead body at all. He says death's pale flag is not advanced there, and he doesn't attribute it to the fact that she's not dead. He attributes it to the fact that she's just so beautiful, death can have no power over her. Young love, am I right? Then the soliloquy adjusts, and he looks over and he sees Tybalt. And he says, you lie there in your bloody sheet. He says, what more favor can I do to thee? What can I do for you more than this to kill the person who killed you, essentially? He says, with that hand that cut thy youth in twain, to sunder his that was thine enemy. Sunder means to cut in half. So to cut, he says, with the hand that cut basically, I'm going to kill your killer, is what he's saying here. So then he asks Tybalt for forgiveness, and then he turns back to Juliet. He says, forgive me, cousin. He says, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? He asks again. So he can't get over the fact that she doesn't look dead, and yet thinks she's dead. He says, shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous? So now he's personifying death, that death is amorous. Amorous means, amor means love. It means that death is in love with Juliet. And that's why this... Harper, shut! Sorry. That death is in love with Juliet. And that, I'm going to pause this for a minute. So he says, is the personified death, this lean, abhorred monster, death, is he keeping you in the dark here to be his paramour? Is that why you haven't lost any of your beauty? Because death wants to keep you gorgeous and young and beautiful? And so he says, for fear of that, I will stay with thee, and never from this palace of dim night depart again. So he's like, to keep death from making you his mistress, I will be here with you, and we will be together forever as husband and wife. Here will I remain with worms that are thy chambermaids. This idea that servants, chambermaids are servants. So here the worms are their servants, and here he will set up his everlasting rest with her. And then he says, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh. Auspicious means auguring or foretelling something good. Inauspicious is the reverse, and that's what they've been from the beginning, since the prologue, right? They've been star-crossed lovers. So he says, I will shake the yoke of inauspicious stars. A yoke is something that you carry. Literally, back in the day, they would have yoke on oxen. And so the ox would have this big wooden thing that he would carry on his back, and it was the yoke. So when we talk about someone carrying their yoke, it's this heavy burden. And for him, he wants to shake off this yoke throw off the yoke of inauspicious stars, that the stars have been conspiring against him all this time, and from this world-wearied flesh, his body, he is going to shake off that yoke by ending it all. And he says, eyes, look your last, arms, take your last embrace, lips, oh you, the doors of breath, seal with the righteous kiss, a dateless bargain to engrossing death. And he kisses her one more time, and then drinks the poison. Then there's this imagery. Actually, he doesn't drink the poison yet. He takes it out, and he speaks to it. He says, come, bitter conduct, come, unsavory guide. He's speaking to the poison here. Bitter conduct, bitter guide. Basically, he's there's some imagery here of a ship, of a sea journey. And he's saying that the poison is the pilot of his sea journey, and his destination is to be with Juliet in the afterlife. Okay, he says, now once run on the dashing rocks, thy seasick, wary bark. And so he's telling the pilot, the unsavory guide here, the poison, to run him onto the rocks so that he can be with Juliet. And then he drinks the poison, and then he speaks to the absent apothecary and says, thy drugs are quick, because he feels it right away. And so he kisses her one last time and says, thus with a kiss, I die. And he dies. This seems like a natural enough place to stop, so we are going to stop here before Friar Lawrence comes with his lantern and spades and tries to stop that which, unfortunately, has already happened. Romeo is lying dead on Juliet's death-like body. Okay. So we're going to stop here. We will finish up Act 5, Scene 3 tomorrow. It's already been a good amount of time for the class period today. So tomorrow we will finish Act 5. The rest of the week after we finish it, we're going to have a little bit of a review on Romeo and Juliet, and then you guys are going to do a film study, picking the film of your choice. My favorite is the Leonardo DiCaprio version that takes place in modern day, and instead of swords, they have guns that are called sword 9mm. And anyway, it's very bizarre, but I'm a fan, so. It's very stylistic and great. But if you want like a classic telling, Franco Zeffirelli's version is great for that, from the 1970s or 80s, 70s, I think. And then the 2013 version with Haley Steinfeld is a little bit more kind of true to, well, it's not entirely true to, but it's more of a period piece. But all of them kind of deviate from the text a little bit. So anyway, it's up to you. You guys are going to be doing that for the rest of the week. But tomorrow we will finish Act 5. All right? Have a great day. Keep it real.